Blood splashed onto the lavish palace walls as laser blasts consumed the royal wedding ceremony, with Princess Zara frantically scanning for any soul that could save her from the encroaching rebel soldiers. But Zara saw no saviors to be found. Her new husband had been cleaved in half, his innards disintegrated, and his fine silken clothing now a charred and smoking mess. Her father's shattered body lay unmoving, riddled with smoking blast holes. The Bolian royal guards had all been executed, their armored bodies scattered lifeless around the great hall, and her aristocratic wedding guests were all fleeing in abject terror, far more concerned for their own lives than her own. The only one left standing by the princess's side was a hairy, four-legged earth beast, a ruggedly handsome German shepherd dog named Max, genetically engineered for loyalty and companionship, and at his side stood his handler, a tall and imposing human named Arthur, laser pistol drawn, who stared down the advancing rebel platoons fearlessly. Bolian rebel soldiers now swarmed into the great hall, weapons raised as they marched lockstep towards the princess. Leading them was the charismatic revolutionary named Rax, his eyes locked on Zara like a predator about to pounce. Arthur fired off several precise warning shots, halting the rebels in their tracks. Meanwhile, Max snarled and circled around Zara, ready to brutally maul any Bolian who dared approach. "Stand back! The princess is under my protection," Arthur bellowed, his baritone voice echoing through the cavernous hall. A confused murmur rippled through the rebel ranks. Rax stepped forward, glancing at the gory remains of the Bolian aristocracy, before sneering at Arthur. "Human, your diplomatic mission is null and void. There will be no trade agreements with a toppled regime. Now stand aside. That royal bitch is coming with us, to stand trial for her family's crimes against the people." Arthur's finger tightened around his trigger. He was a trained negotiator, not a soldier, but letting these thugs abduct the princess would be tantamount to a death sentence for her. His superiors had sent him to this alien world to forge a peaceful alliance that would be the start of humanity's expansion to the stars. That future now lay in smoldering ruins all around him. But perhaps saving this princess could salvage something from this debacle, a living witness to vouch for him, to prove he did everything he could to save the peace accords. Max took the decision out of Arthur's hands. The war dog hurled himself at the nearest rebel trooper with a guttural roar, seizing the Bolian's neck in his powerful jaws. The soldier screamed as fangs punctured deep into his leathery blue skin. Laser blasts seared the air. Max and the Bolian collapsed in a tangled heap of blood and shredded flesh. "Run, princess!" Arthur roared, emptying his pistol's energy cell into the ranks of stunned rebel troopers diving for cover. Grabbing Zara's slender hand, Arthur charged towards a servant's entrance behind the palace throne, dragging the princess behind him. They disappeared into a dimly lit access corridor as the rebels unleashed a salvo of burning laser blasts chasing after them. After fleeing the palace, Arthur, Zara, and Max pushed deeper into the thick forests of Bolus. Sweat-soaked and panting, they stumbled upon an abandoned Bolian outpost nestled in a small clearing. The structure looked recently vacated, with scattered equipment and flickering lights hinting at a rushed exit. "We should check inside for supplies," Arthur said, leading them to the entrance. The outpost was a treasure trove of useful items. Arthur found a cache of Bolian blasters and power cells, while Zara gathered food rations and survival gear. But the real prize was a military-grade communicator, which Arthur hoped could connect him to the human embassy. Zara slumped against the wall, her adrenaline fading. "Arthur, I don't think I can keep going tonight. The rebels could still be out there hunting us." Arthur saw the exhaustion etched on her face and relented. "All right, we'll stay here and rest, but we'll need to keep watch." After a sparse meal of ration bars, Zara curled up on a bunk to sleep, while Max lay watchfully at her feet. Arthur set up a defensive perimeter around the outpost using salvaged motion sensors before positioning himself at the entrance to take first shift. Hours dragged by. The forest was pitch black and alive with alien sounds. An unseen creature's wail made the hairs on Arthur's neck stand up. He nearly shot a scurrying rodent that... A twig snapped in the darkness. Arthur froze. Slowly he reached for his blaster. "Zara, wake up," Arthur whispered urgently, shaking the princess. "Something's out there. Stay here with Max." Gun in hand, Arthur crept out of the outpost, scanning the shadows. He took one step, then another, boots crunching on leaves. Shapes shifted between the trees. He squinted, finger on the trigger. Suddenly, a blue fist smashed into Arthur's head, sending him sprawling. Shouts erupted as rebel Bolians burst from the undergrowth, vibroblades glinting. Arthur kicked the nearest attacker and fired, dropping 2 soldiers in flashes of seared flesh. A stabbing pain exploded in his leg. Arthur screamed as a Bolian ripped his knife free from the human's thigh, blue blood spraying. Gritting his teeth, Arthur cracked the rebel's skull with his gun butt. The remaining Bolians broke and ran, melting back into the night. "Arthur," Zara cried, rushing to his side. Max loped protectively around them, still snarling. Arthur grimaced as Zara pressed a compress bandage to his wound, staunching the bleeding. By the time she'd cleaned and dressed the gash, golden sunlight was filtering through the canopy. "What now?" Zara asked fearfully, glancing at the surrounding trees. "What if more rebels find us?" Gripping his blaster tightly, Arthur met her gaze. "Then we have to move, and fast. It's not safe for you here anymore, Princess. We need to go deeper, somewhere they won't follow." Sharing a look of grim resolve, the trio gathered what supplies they could, and ventured out into the great unknown of the Bolian wilderness, not knowing what new dangers lay ahead. Arthur grunted in pain as he limped onward, leaning heavily on Zara for support. The dense undergrowth seemed to reach out and snag at his injured leg with every step, sending fresh waves of agony shooting through his body. But he gritted his teeth and pressed on, knowing that stopping now could mean death for all of them. Ahead, Max prowled through the foliage with a predator's grace, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of danger. The German shepherd's ears twitched and swiveled at every sound, from the rustling of leaves in the wind to the distant cries of alien birds. Occasionally he would pause and sniff the air before changing course, guiding them around hidden sinkholes and steep ravines that could swallow a person whole. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Arthur spotted a small cave nestled against a hillside. "There," he said, pointing with his free hand. "We can take shelter for the night." Zara nodded, her face lined with exhaustion and worry. Together they half-walked, half-stumbled into the cave's yawning mouth, Max following close behind. Inside, the cave was cool and damp with a musty smell that spoke of age and neglect. As their eyes adjusted to the gloom, Arthur and Zara spotted a pile of bones and tattered clothing in one corner. Zara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "An old Bolian explorer from the looks of it," Arthur said grimly, easing himself down to sit against the cave wall. "Poor bastard must have gotten lost out here." Max sniffed at the remains before losing interest, instead moving to stand guard at the cave entrance. Zara, meanwhile, had noticed something else. A battered leather journal, clutched in the explorer's skeletal hand. Gingerly, she pried it loose and began to leaf through the pages. "It's written in an old Bolian script," she said, frowning in concentration as she tried to decipher the faded ink. "My tutors taught me some of this language, but it's been years." Arthur leaned his head back against the cool stone, closing his eyes. "Take your time, Princess. Not like we're going anywhere fast." Minutes turned into hours as Zara pored over the journal, mouthing the words to herself as she slowly translated the ancient text. Suddenly she let out a soft gasp. "Arthur, listen to this," she said urgently. "This explorer, he was searching for some kind of legendary artifact, hidden deep in a temple somewhere in these woods. It's supposed to grant immense power to whoever possesses it." Arthur cracked one eye open, his brow furrowed. "Sounds like a fairy tale to me. We need to focus on getting out of here alive, not chasing after some mythical treasure." But Zara was undeterred, her eyes shining with a feverish intensity as she clutched the journal to her chest. "Don't you see? If I could find this artifact, I could use its power to take back my throne, to free my people from Rax and his rebels, I could make everything right again. Arthur struggled to sit up straighter, wincing at the pain in his leg. Zara, listen to yourself. You're talking about magic and legends, not reality. We need to contact my superiors, find your allies, and get you somewhere safe. That's what matters now. Zara opened her mouth to argue, but froze as Max let out a low, menacing growl. The dog was staring out into the gathering darkness beyond the cave, his hackles raised and teeth bared. Something was out there, watching them from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the first rays of dawn pierced the forest canopy, Arthur, Zara, and Max emerged from the cave, blinking in the sudden light. Arthur's injured leg throbbed with every step, but he gritted his teeth and pushed onward, determined to find a way out of this alien wilderness. Suddenly a dozen figures materialized from the shadows, surrounding them in a tight circle. They were Bolians, but unlike any Arthur had ever seen. Clad in crude animal skins and brandishing primitive spears, they regarded the trio with wary eyes. Max let out a low growl, his fur bristling as he placed himself between the tribesmen and his human companions. Arthur's hand tightened around his blaster, ready to defend Zara at a moment's notice. The tribesmen spoke in harsh, guttural tones, their dialect so ancient and foreign that even Zara struggled to catch more than a few words. She stepped forward cautiously, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Please," she said, speaking slowly and clearly in modern Bolian, "we mean you no harm. We are lost and in need of aid." The tribesmen exchanged glances, muttering amongst themselves. Finally, one of them, a tall, lean Bolian with a necklace of fangs around his neck, stepped forward. Through a series of gestures and broken phrases, he conveyed that they were the guardians of a sacred temple deep within the forest, the same temple mentioned in the Explorer's Journal. Zara's eyes widened with excitement, but Arthur remained skeptical. "We don't have time for this," he muttered under his breath. "We need to find a way to contact the embassy, not go chasing after some fairy tale." But the tribesmen were insistent. They had been watching the group since they entered the forest, and believed them worthy of an audience with their leader, a wizened old Bolian named Zek. With no other options, Arthur, Zara, and Max allowed themselves to be led deeper into the forest, following a winding path known only to the tribesmen. The journey was arduous, with treacherous terrain and hidden dangers at every turn. Arthur's legs screamed in agony, but he refused to show weakness in front of their new allies. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a small village nestled in a clearing, its huts constructed from mud and woven branches. In the center of the village sat an ancient Bolian, his skin weathered and creased like old leather. "I am Zek," he said in a voice that crackled like dry leaves, "and you, Princess Zara, seek the artifact of legend." Zara nodded, her heart pounding with anticipation. "Yes, Great One, the journal spoke of its power. With it I could restore my people and reclaim my throne." Arthur's unease grew with every word. This was sounding more and more like a trap. "But," Zek continued, "the temple is guarded by ancient traps and fearsome creatures. Many have perished in the attempt to claim the artifact." Zara's jaw set with determination. "I will do whatever it takes to save my people." Arthur pulled her aside, his voice urgent. "Zara, think about this. We have no idea what we're walking into. It's too risky." But Zara shook her head, her eyes blazing with a fervor that sent a chill down Arthur's spine. "I have to do this, Arthur. I have to try." Zek watched the exchange with a calculating gaze. "I will guide you to the temple," he said at last. "But first, you must prove your worth through a series of trials. Only then will you be ready to face the challenges ahead." As the trio debated their next move, Max paced restlessly at the edge of the village, his hackles raised and his teeth bared. Something was out there, watching them from the shadows, something ancient and malevolent, biding its time until the moment was right to strike. As the weight of their decision settled upon them, Arthur, Zara, and Max exchanged uneasy glances. The trials ahead promised to be grueling, but without Zek's guidance, they stood little chance of navigating the treacherous forest and reaching the temple. Reluctantly, they nodded their assent. Zek led them to the edge of a deep chasm, where a narrow rickety bridge made of vines and ancient planks stretched across the void. The bridge swayed and creaked ominously as they stepped onto it, the wooden slats groaning under their weight. Halfway across, a high-pitched buzzing filled the air. Arthur looked up to see a swarm of giant insects descending upon them, their iridescent wings glinting in the dappled sunlight. The creatures were the size of his fist, with razor-sharp mandibles and wicked-looking stingers. "Look out!" Zara cried as the swarm enveloped them, the insect's droning buzz drowning out all other sounds. Arthur swatted at the creatures with his hands, but their exoskeletons were hard as armor. Beside him, Zara tore a branch from the bridge's railing and set it alight with her pocket lighter. The makeshift torch flared to life, and she waved it at the insects, causing them to recoil from the flames. Max, meanwhile, bounded nimbly across the bridge, his agility allowing him to evade the worst of the swarm. He barked urgently at Arthur and Zara, urging them to follow. Using their torches to clear a path, Arthur and Zara fought their way through the swarm, the heat and smoke keeping the insects at bay. At last, they stumbled onto solid ground, gasping for breath and covered in angry welts from the creature's stings. He led them to the mouth of a dark, winding cavern. As they stepped inside, the air grew colder and damper, and strange echoing noises reverberated off the walls. The only light came from patches of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the rock, casting an eerie blue glow. As they made their way deeper into the cavern, they came upon a series of intricate puzzles and traps blocking their path. Ancient Bolian glyphs were carved into the walls, hinting at the solutions. Arthur stepped forward, his analytical mind working to decipher the cryptic clues. Under his guidance, they navigated a series of pressure plates, each one triggering a different trap if stepped on in the wrong order. They ducked under swinging blades and leaped over hidden pits, relying on Arthur's quick thinking to see them through. But as they neared the end of the cavern, Arthur's foot brushed against a nearly invisible tripwire. With a grinding rumble, a massive boulder dropped from the ceiling, rolling towards them with terrifying speed. Max leaped forward, planting himself firmly in the boulder's path. With a snarl of exertion, he braced his powerful body against the stone, his claws scrabbling for purchase on the cavern floor. "Go!" he barked at Arthur and Zara, his muscles straining as he held the boulder at bay. They hesitated for only a moment, before sprinting for the cavern's exit, wincing at the sound of Max's pained yelps echoing behind them. They burst out into the sunlight, blinking and gasping, just as Max came hurtling out of the cavern's mouth, the boulder crashing down behind him in a cloud of dust and debris. Zek was waiting for them, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Impressive," he said, eyeing Max with something like respect. "You have passed the second trial, but the final challenge will test more than just your physical prowess. It will test the very strength of your bond." Arthur, Zara, and Max exchanged wary glances, their bodies aching and their minds reeling from the trials they had already endured. As they steeled themselves for whatever lay ahead, a shadow detached itself from the trees and stepped out into the light. The malevolent presence that had been stalking them since they entered the forest grinned wickedly, its eyes glinting with cruel amusement. It was a Bolian, but unlike any they had ever seen, tall and gaunt, with pale, almost translucent skin and a mouth full of needle-sharp teeth. "Welcome," it hissed, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "I have been waiting for you." The creature's gaze locked onto Zara, and it licked its lips hungrily. "The princess who would be queen, and how delightful. I will enjoy breaking you." Arthur stepped forward, placing himself between Zara and the creature. "You'll have to go through me first," he growled, his hand tightening around the grip of his blaster. The creature laughed, a sound like the snapping of brittle bones. "Oh, I intend to," it said, its grin widening. "I intend to." As the grinning creature stepped into the light, Arthur and Zara recoiled in shock. Standing before them was none other than Krath, Zara's supposedly dead husband. Sinister glee danced in his eyes as he surveyed their horrified expressions. "Surprised to see me, my love?" Zara's voice trembled. We saw you die." "Of course," Krath sneered, "and I'll stop at nothing to claim the artifact's power for myself. I will rule Bolus, and no one will stand in my way. Not you, not the princess, not even your mangy mutt." Max snarled, his hackles rising. Zek stepped forward, urgency etched into the lines of his weathered face. "We must hurry. Complete the final trial before Krath can stop us." The old Bolian led them into a vast field dominated by a towering ancient tree. Its gnarled branches seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Zek turned to face them, his eyes glinting. "This sacred guardian will test you to your very core. You must each face your deepest fears and doubts to pass through to the temple beyond." Arthur glanced at Zara and Max, seeing his own apprehension mirrored in their eyes. Steeling himself, he approached the great tree, Zara and Max at his side. As they drew near, the tree's branches suddenly lashed out, snaking around their limbs and pulling them in. Arthur struggled against the rough bark, but it was no use. His vision swam and blurred, and then he was back in the palace, laser blasts searing the air. His fellow diplomats fell around him, their lifeless eyes staring accusingly. Guilt threatened to swallow him whole. He should have done more, should have saved them. Beside him, Zara stood frozen, her face a mask of anguish. Spectral figures surrounded her, whispering doubts into her ears. "You're not fit to lead. You'll fail your people, just as you failed to save your family." Max whimpered, his tail tucked between his legs. He was a pup again, cowering before the looming figures of his trainers. "Worthless runt. You'll never be strong enough." As they drowned in their worst fears, Krath's laughter echoed around them, taunting and cruel. In the waking world, the rebel leader and his followers stormed into the clearing, weapons drawn. Zek rallied his tribesmen, and the field erupted into a fierce battle. But for Arthur, Zara, and Max, lost in their waking nightmares, the outside world had fallen away. Arthur watched helplessly as his failures played out before him, each one a fresh wound. The weight of the lives he couldn't save threatened to crush him. Through the haze of grief and self-recrimination, a tiny spark of defiance flickered to life in his chest. This wasn't real. He had done everything he could to protect his people, just as he had done everything to keep Zara and Max safe. They had been through so much together, had forged a bond stronger than any doubt or fear. With a burst of clarity, Arthur called out to his companions, his voice cutting through the nightmarish visions. "Zara, Max, this isn't real. Remember who you are. Remember what we've been through together. We're stronger than this." Zara's head snapped up, her eyes clearing. Max's growls took on a note of determination. Slowly, painfully, they fought their way back to each other, leaning on the trust and understanding they had built. As the visions faded and the tree released its hold, Arthur, Zara, and Max emerged back into the waking world. Krath and his rebels were locked in battle with Zek's tribesmen, the clash of weapons and the cries of the wounded filling the air. Arthur turned to Zara and Max, exhaustion and fierce determination etched into every line of his face. No words were needed. As one, they pushed forward, ready to confront Krath and claim the artifact, their bond stronger than ever in the face of the challenges ahead. As the trio emerged from the ancient tree's embrace, the sounds of battle assaulted their ears. Zek's tribesmen clashed with Krath's rebel forces, the ring of steel and the cries of the wounded filling the air. And there, at the center of the chaos, stood Krath himself, a sinister grin on his face and a strange, pulsing weapon in his hands. "Surrender now," Krath demanded, his voice cutting through the din, "and tell me where the temple is hidden. You cannot hope to win this fight." Zara stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. The trials had tested her, pushed her to her limits, but she had emerged stronger, more certain of her path. She would not cower before this man, not anymore. "I will never let you claim the artifact, Krath," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "I will not let you rule over my people with its power. This ends now." Krath's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, the battle shifted. Zek's tribesmen, despite their bravery, were slowly being pushed back towards the tree, the rebel forces threatening to overwhelm them. In that moment, Max leapt into action. The loyal German shepherd bounded forward, teeth bared, and latched onto Krath's arm. The rebel leader howled in pain and surprise, his grip on the strange weapon faltering. It clattered to the ground, and Arthur seized his chance. The human dove for the weapon, snatching it up and rolling to his feet in one fluid motion. Krath, shaking off Max's attack, lunged at Arthur, and the two men became locked in a desperate hand-to-hand struggle. Zara and Max, meanwhile, turned their attention to the rebel forces. Side by side, they charged into the fray, Zara wielding a spear she had snatched up from a fallen tribesman, Max a snarling blur of fur and fangs. Together, they fought to push back the rebels, their movements perfectly synchronized, their bond stronger than ever. Suddenly, a deep rumble echoed through the field, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The ancient tree, its purpose fulfilled, began to unravel, its bark peeling away to reveal a hidden path leading down into the earth. "Zara, Max, this way!" Arthur shouted, breaking away from Krath and racing towards the opening. Krath, realizing what was happening, tried to give chase, but Zek and his tribesmen surged forward, forming a living barrier between the rebel leader and the trio. Arthur, Zara, and Max plunged into the darkness, the path sealing shut behind them with a grinding rumble. They found themselves in a dimly lit tunnel, the walls adorned with ancient Bolian symbols that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. There was no turning back now. With grim determination, they pressed on into the unknown, guided by the symbols and their own unwavering resolve. The temple and the artifact within awaited them at the end of this path, and they would reach it, no matter the cost, before Krath and his forces could find another way in. As Arthur, Zara, and Max ventured deeper into the winding tunnel, an eerie change came over their surroundings. Strange, pulsating veins began to appear along the rough-hewn walls, glowing with an unsettling bioluminescence that cast twisted shadows across their faces. The air grew thick and oppressive, making each breath feel like a struggle. An inexplicable sense of dread settled heavily upon the trio, their nerves fraying with each step forward. Suddenly, a distant sound drifted through the tunnels, echoing off the stone walls and growing louder as they advanced. It was a rhythmic chanting, the words spoken in an ancient Bolian dialect that seemed to writhe and twist in their ears. Max's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in his throat as the chanting intensified, the guttural incantations reverberating through their bones. As they rounded a bend in the tunnel, they found themselves standing at the entrance of a vast underground chamber that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. In the center of the chamber, a towering obsidian statue loomed over them, its grotesque form depicting a nightmarish creature, with multiple limbs and glowing otherworldly eyes that seemed to bore into their very souls. At the base of the statue, a group of hooded figures knelt in reverence, their voices rising and falling in an unsettling chorus. Arthur, Zara, and Max watched in horror as one of the figures rose to his feet and stepped forward, slowly reaching up to remove his hood. As the hood fell away, Rax's face was revealed, his features contorted in a mask of madness, his eyes glazed over with a fanatic fervor. "Fools," Rax proclaimed, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You think the artifact is merely a tool for ruling Bolus. No, it is the key to unleashing an ancient eldritch horror upon the universe." Arthur and Zara exchanged a look of shock and revulsion as Rax continued, his words dripping with malice. "I have been working in secret with this cult, dedicated to the awakening of the Great Old One. Krath's pursuit of the artifact was nothing more than a diversion, a way to keep you occupied while we prepared for this moment." As Rax began to recite the final incantation, his voice rising to a fevered pitch, Max let out a fierce snarl and leaped forward, his powerful jaws clamping down on Rax's arm. The cultists, their concentration broken, turned to face the intruders, their eyes blazing with fanatical rage. Arthur and Zara, realizing that they had no choice but to fight, charged into the fray, their weapons at the ready. The chamber erupted into a chaotic whirlwind of action, with Arthur and Zara desperately fending off the cultists as Max grappled with Rax, trying to keep the madman from completing the ritual. As the battle raged on, the statue began to crack and crumble, dark energy pulsing from its fractured surface. The air crackled with an unholy power, threatening to engulf the chamber and all those within it. Arthur and Zara fought with a desperate intensity, their hearts pounding in their chests as they struggled to disrupt the ritual and prevent the unthinkable from being unleashed upon the universe. As the battle raged on, Zara scanned the chamber, her eyes darting from one combatant to the next. Suddenly, a glimmer caught her attention. There, embedded in the base of the towering obsidian statue, pulsed a small, luminous orb. A flicker of recognition ignited in her mind, a passage from the ancient explorer's journal surfacing in her thoughts. The orb, not the statue, was the true artifact, the conduit of power they sought. "Arthur!" Zara shouted over the chaos, gesturing frantically towards the orb. "The orb, that's the key!" Arthur, locked in a grapple with two hooded cultists, caught Zara's gaze. Understanding dawned on his sweat-streaked face. With a grunt, he shoved the cultists away and began to fight his way towards the statue, weaving and dodging as blasts of dark energy sizzled past him. Across the chamber, Max and Rax circled each other, snarling like two wolves vying for dominance. Max's enhanced strength and lightning reflexes kept the rebel leader at bay, but Rax's cunning and brutality made him a formidable opponent. They clashed again and again, neither giving an inch. As Arthur neared the statue, a towering figure emerged from the shadows, barring his path. The figure, clad in ornate robes and wielding a glowing staff, radiated an aura of malevolence. Arthur skidded to a halt, raising his weapon. The exalted prophet lunged at Arthur, his staff a blur of motion. Arthur parried the blow, the impact sending shockwaves up his arms. They traded strikes, the clang of metal on metal ringing through the chamber. Zara, seeing Arthur in trouble, leaped to his aid. Drawing on her training in Bolian martial arts, she launched herself at the prophet, her fists and feet a whirlwind of precise strikes. Together, she and Arthur drove the prophet back, their combined assault overwhelming his defenses. With a final, desperate swing, Arthur knocked the staff from the prophet's hands. The prophet stumbled, his eyes widening in shock, as Zara delivered a devastating kick to his chest, sending him crashing to the ground in a tangle of robes. Seizing the moment, Arthur lunged for the statue, his fingers closing around the pulsing orb. Power surged through him, ancient and intoxicating, but as he tried to pull the orb free, an invisible force held it fast, refusing to yield. "They're stuck," Arthur yelled, straining against the unseen barrier. "We need to find another way." Zara's mind raced, her gaze sweeping the chamber for any clue, any hint of how to release the orb. Then she saw them, a series of intricate Bolian runes etched into the floor, radiating out from the statue's base. Recognition clicked into place, memories of late-night studies flooding back to her. "Arthur, keep trying," she called, hurrying towards the runes. "I think I know what to do." As Arthur redoubled his efforts, Zara knelt beside the runes, her fingers tracing their ancient curves. She began to chant, her voice low and steady, the words of a long-forgotten ritual falling from her lips like drops of rain. Around her, the chamber shuddered, the statue trembling as if caught in an earthquake. Across the chamber, Rax faltered, his head snapping towards Zara as her chanting filled the air. Max, sensing his chance, lunged forward, slamming into Rax with the force of a freight train. The rebel leader crumpled, his head cracking against the stone floor as he fell. With Rax and the prophet dealt with, Arthur and Zara focused all their energy on the orb, pouring everything they had into the ritual. The chamber quaked and groaned, the statue shuddering as if caught in the throes of an exorcism. For a moment, it seemed as though the entire chamber might collapse, burying them all. But then, with a final triumphant shout from Zara, the orb shattered, exploding into a million shimmering fragments. The statue, its power broken, crumbled to dust, its ancient horror banished back into the void. In the sudden silence, Arthur, Zara, and Max stood amidst the rubble, their chests heaving, their eyes alight with the thrill of victory. As the dust settled around them, Arthur, Zara, and Max emerged from the shattered remains of the eldritch chamber, their bodies aching and their spirits weary. The ancient evil had been vanquished, but at a great cost. Slowly they made their way back through the winding tunnels, guided only by the fading light of the Bolian runes etched into the walls. Every step was a struggle, their limbs heavy with exhaustion. Arthur winced as he moved, the pain from his injuries flaring with each footfall. Zara, her once regal dress now torn and stained, leaned heavily against the tunnel wall for support. Even Max, the indomitable war dog, limped along beside them, his fur matted with blood and ichor. But still they pushed onward, driven by the knowledge that they had faced the unimaginable and emerged victorious. Time seemed to blur as they navigated the labyrinthine passages, until finally they saw a glimmer of light ahead. With renewed energy, they quickened their pace, bursting out of the tunnel mouth and into the lush alien forest of Bolus. Waiting for them at the edge of the tree line was Zek, the wizened Bolian chieftain, surrounded by his tribesmen. The old warrior's face broke into a toothy grin as he saw the trio emerge, battered but alive. Around him, the subdued forms of Krath's rebel forces lay bound and guarded, their once proud demeanor replaced by sullen defeat. Azara staggered forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she faced Zek. "It is done," she said, her voice raw with emotion. "The artifact is destroyed, and the evil that sought to use its power has been defeated." Zek nodded solemnly, placing a gnarled hand on the princess's shoulder. "You have done well, young one. Your bravery and sacrifice will be remembered for generations to come." As the Bolians began to cheer and celebrate their victory, Zara turned to face Arthur and Max, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what must come next. She stepped forward, taking Arthur's hands in her own, her fingers trembling slightly. "Arthur, she began, her voice catching in her throat. "I cannot thank you enough for all that you have done. You and Max have been true friends, and I will never forget the bond we have forged." Arthur swallowed hard, his own eyes glistening as he looked down at the princess. "Zara, you don't have to say anything. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, for you and for Bolus." Beside them, Max whined softly, sensing the impending separation. Zara knelt down, wrapping her arms around the loyal dog's neck and burying her face in his fur. "Oh, Max," she whispered, her voice muffled, "you brave, wonderful creature. I will miss you so much." As Zara rose to her feet, she saw a flicker of pain cross Arthur's face. He stumbled slightly, one hand clutching at his chest. Zara reached out to steady him, concern etched into her features. "Arthur, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Arthur shook his head, trying to wave off her concern. "It's nothing, just a little tired is all." But even as he spoke, he could feel the dark energy from the chamber pulsing through his veins, slowly corrupting his body and mind. He knew then what he had to do. He couldn't risk staying on Bolus, couldn't risk putting Zara or Max in danger. With a heavy heart, he made his decision. Zara's eyes widened, her grip on his hands tightening. "What? No, Arthur, you can't leave. We need you here. I need you." But Arthur just shook his head, a sad smile on his lips. "You don't need me, Zara. You have everything you need to lead your people, to rebuild Bolus. But I have to go back to Earth, to find a way to fix what's happening to me." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks as she nodded, understanding dawning in her eyes. She pulled Arthur into a fierce hug, holding him tight as if she could keep him there by sheer force of will. "I will never forget you, Arthur," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You will always have a place here with us." With a final squeeze, Zara released him, stepping back to stand with Zek and the other Bolians. Arthur and Max turned to leave, their hearts heavy as they began the long trek back to their ship. As they walked, Arthur could feel his strength waning, the dark energy sapping his vitality with every step. He stumbled, his vision blurring and his breath coming in ragged gasps. Max, ever vigilant, moved to his master's side, pressing his furry body against Arthur's leg in support. Together they made their way through the dense foliage, the sounds of the Bolian celebration fading behind them. When they finally reached the ship, Arthur collapsed against the hull, his body shaking with exhaustion and pain. With a soft whine, Max nuzzled his hand, urging him onward. Summoning the last of his strength, Arthur hauled himself into the cockpit, Max jumping up beside him. As the ship roared to life, Arthur looked back at the receding surface of Bolus, his thoughts filled with memories of Zara and their shared trials. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that the darkness within him would only grow stronger with time. But with Max by his side, he was determined to face whatever challenges lay ahead, to find a way to purge the corruption from his soul. As the ship broke through the atmosphere, the vast expanse of space stretched out before them, cold and infinite. Arthur leaned back in his seat, his eyes drifting closed as exhaustion finally claimed him. Beside him, Max curled up on the floor, his loyal presence a comfort in the face of the unknown. Together they hurtled through the void, two souls forever changed by the horrors they had witnessed and the unbreakable bond they had forged in the face of unimaginable darkness. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.